This took a whole lot of people by surprise, this Eric Cantor upset in Virginia. Breitbart covered this race. You know, Laura Ingraham was very focused on this race. There were a few others too, Mark Levin, but really no one expected. You could tell by some of the TV coverage where anchors were vamping until they found some analysts to weigh in on the race. So what was it about this that caught people off guard? How did David, it's Brat, right? We were trying to figure that out too. How did he pull
David
it off?
Brat, yeah. I think it caught up people off guard because it's never happened before in the history of the position of majority leader, which has existed since 1899. So it's not like, you might have predicted this if you just kind of knew a little bit more or something. It's just a huge earthquake that it was hard to see coming. We covered the race really seriously at Breitbart, but even, looking at polls and following the race closely and talking to people there and the Laura Ingraham rally and everything, it still was just a huge shock when the results came in last night.
Jonathan, I've been reading some different takes on this one, and one of the opinions, and you would be in a much better position to judge whether this is true or not, one of the opinions on why Cantor lost isn't really overall immigration. It isn't the fact that Brat ran a better campaign. It's the fact that his constituents feel as though he stopped serving them and began serving himself a whole lot more.
Well, any time you have an incumbent lose a primary race, you're going to have a lot of different factors. And I think you have to have constituents feeling like somebody didn't stop serving them in order for that to happen. It's kind of a necessary ingredient. But if you look at the campaign, David Brat basically stopped talking about anything but immigration in the last few weeks of the campaign. Meanwhile, we have tens of thousands of children streaming across the southern border. That is what the discussion revolved around in the campaign. I don't think you can ignore the impact of immigration here.
Jonathan Strong with us from Breitbart News, Breitbart.com. He's got a piece up from last night, Earthquake, also an interview with David Brat up at Breitbart.com, too. Eric Cantor did not necessarily take the race for granted, too. He spent, millions of dollars, campaigned pretty hard, and so perhaps it does come down to this immigration issue. Does this send a shockwave through the GOP caucus? Does it kill any chance of immigration reform for the rest of this year?
I talked to some Republicans last night who are very interested in passing immigration legislation through the House, and they said, yeah, immigration's dead now. There's just no way that anyone would want to go near it when we've witnessed the majority leader, be deposed over the issue. It's become completely toxic overnight. And it's a sea change in that issue. I think that's definitely true.
Spending some time with Jonathan Strong, Washington editor at Breitbart News. Your piece, I think, is an awesome one because, you open it up talking about Aristotle saying nature abhors a vacuum. Well, that looks like what we might have going on right now.
Yeah, we've got a big one. And what's going to happen is a very brutal, bloody power struggle over the next little while because right now there's basically going to be an empty spot for majority leader, and that is going to precipitate a big struggle. We think Kevin McCarthy is going to try to move up from whip to that, but he could be up against maybe Jeb Hensarling or another kind of person further to the right. Then for the open whip spot that would leave, you've got probably Steve Scalise going to be against Peter Roskam from Illinois, and that will be a very tough battle.
Your former colleague over at National Review, Robert Costa, was saying he had some people close to Paul Ryan last night saying, nope, not interested at all in leadership. He's more focused on being Ways and Means chairman. Are you hearing that too?
That is what I've heard. Also, it's notable that Paul Ryan is probably the single biggest proponent of immigration reform in the House GOP conference, and that's the reason that Eric Cantor lost last night. So, I know he's got he's got a very high profile, but you do have to factor in that issue when you're looking at this as well.
Now, is this good news for John Boehner? Is this bad news for John Boehner? I've heard people with a take on both sides of that.
It's interesting because Cantor is something of, I mean, it's less than it used to be, but Cantor's always been a little bit of a rival. Interestingly, Boehner's statement that he issued last night about this, it was, I think it's fair to say, if you read between the lines, it was a fairly damning, it was a shot at Cantor because the tone of it was like Cantor had just died or suffered a death in his family, and not giving him any sort of light at the end of the tunnel, like he might get out of this somehow. However, I think Boehner's in a lot of danger right now because it's about to get very chaotic and unpredictable.
Jonathan Strong with us from Breitbart.com. It's Riley and Scott here on WROK. Is there any kind of domino effect here as we move forward through some of the primaries? McDaniel in Mississippi, does he get some wind in his sails due to this particular win, do you think?
I think it's easy to see that happening. However, all these races are unique and they have different factors. So I think a lot of people expect for that to happen, but personally, I'm still waiting to see whether it does.
And the other point, too, was we've heard David Brat described last night and into this morning as a Tea Party guy. A lot of the Tea Party organization stayed out of this race. There wasn't a lot of money funneled toward him. And I've seen some interviews with him, including yours, where, maybe a Tea Party, but he's kind of a Chamber Club for Growth kind of guy, too. It's not a strict a Tea Party kind of candidate, is he?
He's something, he's somewhat interesting in that he doesn't really necessarily identify himself as a Tea Partier. He tried to say last night to me and to other people, he's just a standard, rock-ribbed Republican, and he's standing up for the principles that the Republican Party has always stood for, but hasn't always acted on in practice. And I think one of the big reasons that the Tea Party groups, the national groups, didn't get behind him is they didn't think that he really had a chance at winning.
Mm-hmm.
But one interesting point that one of our reporters was making to me is that it's kind of a little puzzling that some of the candidates that they spent a lot of money on, the national groups, did so poorly, and then the one that didn't have any help, pulled off the biggest upset in recent memory.
Yeah, something for us to ponder on this one, because there's going to be a whole lot of pondering coming up in the near future. He's Jonathan Strong, Washington editor at Breitbart News. Jonathan, thanks for your time this morning.